My training and background, I'll give you a little bit about myself, is in sociology and folklore. And folklore is really like storytelling and critical narrative. And so if you've read anything by Toni Morrison, she's an excellent folklorist, a hero of mine. And so my talk is not going to be chronological. So if you're like trying to be like, oh, well, here's where she starts in 1954, she's going to talk about the bus boycott, I'm not going to do that. So I find it a little boring, because the teacher in me is like, I never want to teach the same way twice. So I never give the same talk twice. But the other piece of that is to kind of just stimulate you differently and really try to get you guys to think as you've been eating, and hopefully you won't fall asleep on me. So here we go. And if you do, I'm definitely a student of the Socratic method, so I might just call on you. So don't let me find you sleeping. So as Sarah says, I'm Director of Social Change at Ohio State. I was recruited after my doctoral program to sort of stay there and do this work. And it was very interesting because to think about being tasked to come up with innovative solutions around rural and urban poverty domestically, and to look at other issues around different systems like education, mass incarceration, etc., might seem daunting, but I think it was actually something I was born to do. I thought I was going to be an astrophysicist. For those of you who don't know, like what's astrophysics? It's like a mix of astronomy and physics. So it's not only is it super nerdy, but I thought I was going to work for NASA, and this is how arrogant I was. I thought I was going to work for, at 9, I thought I was going to work for NASA, and then I was going to name a planet after myself, but I'm named, so I thought, well, that would seem really arrogant, so I'm going to name it after my mom. Me and my mom have the same name. So I would say, oh, this is, Patty's Planet or whatever, and it really, was still me. So it's so funny, so how you grow up and life changes, and what happens is, during my undergraduate career, I had a ton of different experiences outside the classroom where when I would go and work in this radioactive material lab, it was super boring. It was the most boring part of my life probably ever. And then I would go out and be just all about these different social justice issues, from women's issues, and being an ally to LGBT community, be involved in Jewish community, Asian community. And I was like, what am I doing? My passions aren't matching. And so I had to like come to Jesus moment, right? So this moment that happens, and because born and raised in Baptist church, so I had this come to Jesus moment. And I was like, you know what? I should probably change my major. And so that happened, and this social justice person was born. But even before that, I didn't really have a clue that I was born to do this. And what my story, just a little bit more about me, is that I was born homeless. So my parents got a divorce right before I was born, and my mom was left destitute. And so I think being someone who fights adversity, my mom said I was born to be a fighter. And so I've always seemed like I've been fighting something, right? Either I'm championing for someone else or on some type of issue. And so grew up in Section 8 housing. We didn't even really have a car till I was in high school. And then I realized as my mom worked very hard before the last 10 years of her life, worked very hard, she never made more than $25,000 a year. And I think about how, wow, what a miracle that she had 4 children that all went to college, regardless of the circumstance, and that she got to see us all graduate before she passed, and she got to see me get my doctoral program. And so so the arrogance switched, where I got my doctorate degree, but it was like she got her doctorate degree because we have the same name, and but it's really quite beautiful in that sense, and I think that those life challenges, coupled with this really long educational career, 4 degrees later, has allowed for me to be the type of practitioner. And so I'm not this ivory tower person. Like, I'm not this person locked up writing books, talking about poverty, right? Like, I'm a person in the trenches. And so I think it's really interesting that how my life came full circle, and that wasn't my plan. So, when man planned, God laughs. And so it's just a very sort of interesting beginning for me. So the current work that I do, like I said, we're not going to go chronologically, right? So the current work that I do, last year we did some capacity things. So a lot of my work is in Central Ohio, and we really want to develop replicable models. So I've done some work in East St. Louis. If you know anything about East St. Louis, just to be transparent, I always talk about, like, I'm a scholar, but I have a little bit of thug left in me. And so, the scholar activist, or like a little bit of thug, which keeps me honest, I go to East St. Louis and I was like, well, I thought we had some issues, but they killed the mayor, Like there's some issues in East St. Louis. I mean, it's some really tragedy, and I use humor as a coping mechanism, but it was pretty bleak to kind of go out there several times and take students out there to kind of see that. And so for the work that I do that's urban-rural, just to kind of give you an anecdotal story that's funny but not funny, but I'm that person, so I'm just going to say it anyway. So I've seen wild turkeys before, right? But usually you see wild turkeys where? In the country, right? And I see corner stores, right? If y'all seen where are corner stores? In the city, right? So I'm in East St. Louis, and there were wild turkeys by the corner store. And I never seen that before. As someone who does a lot of work in Southeast Ohio, Appalachia, Ohio, and do a lot of work in urban areas, many of it, we were just talking about Chicago and New York at my table. I never have seen in Chicago or New York wild turkeys going around, right? So it was just that juxtaposition of where all the issues of rural poverty and all the issues of urban poverty came together, and it showed, and so it was really telling. So the work that we try to do is, how do we try to come up with solutions to poverty that are neighborhood based, instead of really, because think about it, we're the 52nd year in the war on poverty, and more kids are in poverty than ever before. In Ohio, we have 1 in 3 kids going hungry. We have enough food. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? And if you've gone to any school in Ohio and looked at the food that kids are eating, we're having this beautiful salad. It's really great. The kids are not having this type of fresh food experience, right? And so the McDonaldization of society, right, where we just have this booming, fast food sort of place, has really infiltrated our schools. And some of the schools that I do work in, the food is not even prepared from those bags or whatever mystery meat it is. It's like brought in. So there's not even like kitchens in some of the schools that I've been in. So even the likelihood of food being cooked is not there. So we're talking about sort of this huge, we even just look at education as example, this huge, massive, savage inequality. And so part of the work that I do is like, how do we close that gap, right? If education is the civil rights issue of our time, how are we doing that? Because here's the other issue. We are more segregated now than we've ever been. And so let me give an example. So in the work in the Near East Side is one of the neighborhoods in Central Ohio that we do work in. It's a food desert. The kids graduating from the high school there is about 46% graduation rate, which is well below the national average. And there's no place to work. There's like a Wendy's. And then like no other jobs. 88% of the people don't have like a car. So there's all these sort of issues. Highest diabetes rate in the state. So there's all these issues around access. Now the Near East Side, now we're going to go backwards. The 1960s was a booming place. It was known as Bronzeville, and it was a place where Black and Jews lived together. Now, why do you think that here we go, interactive. Why do you think Blacks and Jews were living together in a neighborhood, particularly in Central Ohio, and they were only living really in that neighborhood? Discrimination. So because of deeds on houses in places like Westerville, which is a suburb of Columbus, there are deeds still in the 90s that said Blacks and Jews couldn't live there, right? So we're talking about historical disenfranchisement of 2 historically marginalized groups, and in places sort of all over the country, from Atlanta to Columbus, Ohio, etc., neighborhoods where Blacks and Jews lived together and other immigrant groups because there was no other place for them to be. Right? So that story of Blacks and Jews is not just this like, let's talk about Egypt and let's talk about slavery. No, we could talk about 30 years ago, right? And sort of what has happened since then. So more about me, because all PhDs are narcissists. And so for me, my journey of understanding Blacks and Jews together really came in my undergraduate experience. I lived in an honors dorm on North Campus, and I met this guy named Michael Cohen, right, so he's just a Jewish boy, and he identified to be as conservative. For those of you who don't know, like, that means he keeps kosher. He wears his tzitzit on the side, which are braided cords, and so he was just, he wore kippah most of the time, and kippah is the yarmulke, the little hat that people see, and so. And he befriended me, and he was just like, I'm really interested in doing this Black-Jewish dialogue. And I was like, I'm like involved in all the things. Like, I can't do one more thing, Michael. And he was just like, come on, it'll be great. It's like, we're just, get together sporadically. Like, he was just really selling it to me. And I was like, well, okay. Like I had, not a million things that I was doing at the time. And in 2002, for those of you who don't know, that's when the affirmative action case for Michigan was happening. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And since I was such an activist, a baby activist, I was just so engaged in that type of thing. So our friendship turned into this partnership. And so I quit my job at the lab, right? Quit my job at the lab. I needed a job. I mean, I could not work in college, and so the irony of I actually started to work for the Jewish Student Center for outreach and engagement. So here I was recruiting Jewish students, and it just became this thing where everyone thought I also was Jewish. I'd be like, oh, Baruch Hashem, I'd be like, I know everybody, and so no understanding like the laws and like which like it's a mitzvot, right? The laws and all the different things that go along with it was really great for me because I was telling Sarah this morning I thought after undergrad I was going to go to seminary because it was like super nerdy. After I changed my major, I was like, I'm going to go to Harvard Divinity, and then I'm going to get an Old Testament theology degree because that was something that really interested me, which if you understand anything about Judaism, the Old Testament is the complete book, their complete holy book, which is the Tanakh. And so it says for the Torah and the writings and the prophets. And so for me, working at Hillel was like this great thing because I got to study with a rabbi. Rabbi stands for teacher, right? And for free. And I'm just like all about for free. And I worked there, was getting paid better than minimum wage. I mean, it was like all the wins. So I felt like, okay, I'll do this Black Jewish dialogue. It became something very important to me, and it also fit into my social justice really realm because having that critical dialogue helped me to understand what was going on currently in the Near East Side, what was going on with the fact that Jews left and moved to the suburbs in Bexley and rich Black folks that left, right? And so it was very interesting that all these sort of things in undergrad with my Black-Jewish relations helped me understand how some cities evolved. And that's, the irony of that is really interesting. So the group was called Hotep Shalom. So Shalom means peace, mostly. And then Hotep is Swahili for sort of peace, right? So we brought these groups together. And we also, which is also very like serendipitous, you've heard about the sojourns trips that the kids here locally are taking, right? And so I was like, well, we were doing that in 2002, and really cool, right? So those sort of experiences are so great for these high school students because it wasn't until college that I got to have that experience and got to travel. And so, but what we did was a little different, was that we did a Black Jewish sort of trip through the South. And so I remember specifically being on Bill Street. Have you ever been on Bill Street and you didn't have barbecue? You missed out. But the other interesting thing about Bill Street is they have an open container policy. Anybody know that? Yeah, and I was a senior, so I was of age. And the interesting thing, and this is where I'm coming to one of my points of my talk, is Mike and I and the other students who went on this trip, which were also upperclassmen, went to, we were eating together, living life together. And so one of the really things that I've learned about coalition building is if you're not spending time together that's not like a meeting, you're never going to have the organic connection, right? And so Mike and I are friends to this day. He travels around the world for the work that he does with the government and always remembers like, Patty loves trinkets or whatever from different places of the world. So if he just goes in somewhere in the world, he'll mail it to me. So even though he's married, 2 kids or whatever, our friendship has been that strong over all this time. And he still remembers, and I remember his birthday, and and I know his little brother and his family. And so all those things couldn't have happened if we just were a student organization. We wouldn't have had that like transformative relationship. And so when you're thinking about where is Black Jewish space now, you think about, if we're not living together or spending time together outside of meetings, you're never going to have that coalition. You're never going to have that togetherness. So you have to be intentionally living life together. That's the point. You have to intentionally be living life together, and that's something that that particular group really taught me. So interestingly enough, in the work that I do, I have also found a lot of synergy with another Jewish organization in Central Ohio that's reaching out to refugees. And so, of course, when folks usually are refugees in Central Ohio, if you don't know, typically are living in the poorer areas. It's really tough. And again, you know, that sort of need for service, a need for synergy, knowing how relationships build. So all that time that I have been immersed in Jewish community allowed me to really navigate that space really differently. But it has to also work the other way, right? You have to also have Jewish folks who are invested in that and wanting to navigate life very differently as well. So, like I was saying, the Near East Side, about the 60s or 70s, that's when the Jewish population and the economically more wealthy, I talk about the Huxtable family. So when I say Huxtable family, what do you think I mean by that? Yeah, they're Huxtables. Right, so like black families that have some money, right? And so the idea is like the 60s and 70s brought all this change, but it also brought all this sort of white flight and escape from different communities to go to the suburbs, right? And so you had all this happening, and so you left this poor community. And so the irony of Central Ohio is that the community that's mostly Jewish is right next door to the poor black community. So you have this sort of dividing line, Nelson Road, that divides them, and I think that it's just a kind of ridiculous notion to me. And so what are we doing to sort of address that? And so I think what needs to happen, and Jonathan Kozol, who is a Jewish man who did lots of work during the civil rights movement, talks about how there needs to be a new civil rights movement. And I agree. And I agree, but it needs to look differently. It can't look like it did before. We're not going to be at lunch tables getting beaten up. You know, we don't need to revisit some of those really atrocious things. We can be different. I think we need to be focusing on education, environment, a lot of these things where multiple communities are passionate about, but how are we going to come around with some synergy? And so I think that's something that needs to be intentional with adults. So the adults in the room here need to be making decisions, because if we're not working together, we're not going to have an ecologically sound environment for our kids. If you're looking at data around just environment, just air quality, in Ohio there are two big cities, Cleveland and Cincinnati, top 10 for the worst air quality in the nation. But that's it. Give you a second. Right? That's awful, right? And so you think about Cleveland is what? Just a hop and a skip from here, right? And so you think about if their air quality is bad, how is your air quality? How many of you have seen Erin Brockovich? Erin Brockovich. So Erin Brockovich, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it, because if you understand what's going on in Flint, Michigan, how many people saw what went on in Flint? For those who know about Flint, West Virginia water crisis, any of us? Okay, I'm mentioning some of these ecological things because it affects poor people, right? West Virginia water crisis, wholly an Appalachian state. You know, it wasn't until Erin Brockovich and some other folks brought attention to there, like the water catches on fire, right? The water without anything is burning kids' skin, right? So then you have the issues that's going on in Flint, Michigan, some of the same things, and then comes out a week and a half ago, y'all gotta pay attention, the water quality in Cleveland and Central Ohio has been tested to be very bad. And so it's the same chromium-6, which is a chemical that Erin Brockovich found out about, did that huge case about, and all these people had cancer, and they finally got some restitution, right? The same chemical that was hurting and killing babies and parents and stuff, in Erin Brockovich's like film and story, it's the same chemical that's found in Cleveland and Columbus. Right? Look at and y'all drinking water right now. Right? So it's probably filtered. It's probably super filtered. But as you will see, I brought my own water. So a little bit of jokes, but kind of serious. And so understanding that, right? Understanding that Blacks and Jews were very active around very synergistic issues, not just in the 60s. We're talking about the first two presidents of the NAACP were Jewish, Joel and Arthur Spingarn. And so people were, and NAACP did a gambit of issues. I think if they were more focused like they were at the turn of the century when we had the first two, the first presidents who were these Jewish guys, right? They would be talking about education and the ecological issue. Because right now I'm very concerned about the nutrition of kids, and now we have this water issue, right? So for instance, one of the programs that we run, all of our school programs after school, we serve nutritious snacks. Why do you think we're serving nutritious snacks after school in these high-need neighborhood communities? Why are we doing that?
Getting nothing nutritious at home.
Right, right. And there's no model. Like, we have such a disconnect from how people used to just grow. Like, you had a grandma who would just grow tomatoes on the corner, right, of her house, right? You just had, like, there was always some cucumbers. Like, my grandmother had a pear tree in the back. I would climb it, and then this is like 90s, and I would climb that pear tree, and get pears. Like, it was this very, this thing that, there wasn't this disconnect from nature and food, and now it's really bad, right? The kids think like a lean cuisine is like real food, right? That frozen food is a real food, right? Like chicken nugget is a food group, and that is not true, right? And so we have kids who have never had real grapes before. When we started doing surveys about kids and nutrition, you never had a grape, so they had grape soda, grape drink, right? Grape Kool-Aid, all these grape type things, but never grapes. 9 years old. That is horrific, right? Because first, there's no surprise that they have the highest diabetes rate, right? In the state of Ohio, when you're a 9-year-old and you never had grapes. That also means you probably never had pineapple. Right? It probably means, things that we sort of are taking for granted that we probably in the room eat and have access to, they're not having. There's not a grocery store in the area, it's corner stores. And so their thought around fruit is like fruit snacks, right? So this is a very basic, and they're not getting served this kind of fruit in their free reduced lunch, let me tell you, right? So one of the things we do is this innovation around food, that we do bring fresh fruits and vegetables, and kids eat them. That there's this whole disconnect that kids won't eat them. Well, what we know by the research is that kids need to be introduced to fruits and vegetables about 12 times before they will like really buy in. So some kids are super fast, and some of it's just because they're hungry. So they're like, I really don't want these carrots, but you brought this ranch, I'm gonna eat it, right? So they're just convinced, But some of it's like, this is a star fruit, we're gonna try it today. They're like, well, what's a star fruit? They ask the questions, right? And so we do all that. So I think what's very interesting is that how we deliver these programs at Ohio State, so not telling chronologically, right, is that it's this human capital. And money, you need some money, right? You need to be able to buy products, buy the food, etc. But really it's the human capital that makes a difference. And so students, grad and undergrad, faculty, staff, alumni, so every creed, every background, international students, Jewish students, whomever, black students, are delivering the programs that we design in my department into community, right? So Halloween's coming up. For those of you who are working with kids, that's kind of a big deal, right? It's a big deal to them. And so we want to have safe environments for our kids to have fun. We don't want to take away from that. And so we work in 5 of the high-need neighborhoods at the community centers and run these huge parties. And what do college students love? Parties. So they come out and they do a really good job running the games, handing out the candy and some fresh fruit. And so we just have a good time together. And so that goes back to that point where you have to live life together, have some synergy around some of these issues, creating safe places and coming together. And so I think that that's something that really shows and resonates, that we borrow still from the civil rights movement, is if you look at Freedom Summer. Are people familiar with Freedom Summer, right? Mid-60s, so 1963, 64 through 66. Freedom Summers were this time where college students from the North and a lot of Jewish students. I wanted to highlight Heather Booth because I feel like no one knows her name. And so Heather Booth was a Jewish student who is an activist in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so I think a lot of the things when we think about the civil rights movement, we think of what names? What are the names we think of civil rights movement? Martin Luther King, maybe Malcolm X on a good day, right? Right, and then you're thinking, well, what about all the other people? We leave out women, we leave out other groups that are involved. If you don't have allies in a movement, that movement is not going to move, right? So Heather Booth was this college student who in 1964 was part of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, spent her summers, she played the guitar, so she used just a simple gift that she had to kind of like intimately connect with kids in the South and use music to kind of teach literacy, which is what we should be doing, right, to help kids. And Fannie Lou Hamer, who was very famous for saying what line? Anybody know? Sick and tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. I feel like I say that every day. And so we know Fannie Lou, we know that her work that she did was important, but Fannie Lou couldn't do all the work that she did if there wasn't allies in that space supporting the work that she did, like Heather Booth, right? So there was a ton of Heather Booths, right, that was doing that work. And so that's why it's really important for us to understand that you have to learn how to stay curious about difference. So that's a point if you're some of y'all are taking notes. Stay curious about difference is one of the reasons why coalitions can work or just go apart. So one of those ways that you can stay curious about difference is to think about attending different cultural events that people are having, right? And not just attending as a spectator, but really being a part of it. So one of those ways there is an activity, a cultural, historical activity called Passover, right? That through Jewish communities and a lot of Christian communities celebrate Passover as well. And there's usually, during Passover, there's what that occurs? A Seder. That's right. And so Seders are a great time because if you like food, it's a good time. And one of the things I got to participate in as being part of a Black-Jewish dialogue is we developed a Black-Jewish Seder that merged, that told Heather Booth stories with other college stories of Black students who were also involved in the civil rights movement. So we are not losing that historical narrative that weaves us together. So one of my other points is like you have to know history and you have to honor it and be informed and let it inform the present. Right, so through that Seder, there was all these things going on, right? We had this cultural appreciation, we were organically spending time together, and then you had this amazing taking history, right, honoring it, and letting it inform the present. And so we with BuzzFeed, I don't know if anybody know what BuzzFeed is, but it's sort of like a quick way to get sort of news and fun facts, and students love it because it's on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I feel like it's kind of killing kids' brains a little bit because they're not taking the time to read the whole book, right? They're reading this sort of snippet of, oh, this horrible thing happened in Flint, Michigan, right? But they don't understand that the way that the water crisis happened in Flint, Michigan, you got to look back 30 years. What was going on in order for it to be the way it is now, right? In the same way, and then like I talk about this neighborhood in the Near East Side of Columbus, we have to look back 40 years to kind of understand what has happened there, and then look back even further, 60 years, right, to understand what was the Black-Jewish dynamic there that was this amazing thing. And so like I said, I don't do chronological storytelling, and so if we go 60 years back, the synergy that was there was because, right, they couldn't live anywhere else. We sort of covered that. But Jewish folks had access to being able to buy the businesses and then employ the Black folks over there, right? So you did have this hierarchy of disempowerment, disenfranchisement, but coming together and living together put them in an opportunity to actually really live life together and to really help each other. And so I wonder, where is that today? Right? You still have all these folks like Jonathan Kozol, Mary Elderman, who are doing so much work around how do we keep this sort of going, and I wonder who are they passing the torch to, right? What have we done in Black-Jewish community to make sure that there's this natural synergy? And if you don't know anything about Mary Elderman, she's founder of the Children's Defense Fund, right? And she married a Jewish man, and so she has Jewish children. And so, and I say that because, not that she's like this, you know, we need to have this example and all the women of color in this room need to go marry Jewish men. That's not what I'm saying. If that's what you heard, I apologize. But what I'm saying is, you know, there's how do you organically are making sure that these folks are coming together and we're meeting these principles, and that there is this information sharing, that we're not having this BuzzFeed feed culture prevent us from having this revolutionary social movement that we still need to be having currently. Because otherwise, we're not just going to be losing, this battle around race and ethnicity that we're having now. Like I said, it's going to be this ecological battle that we're losing, right? We're just talking about water as a crisis. I didn't say anything about pipelines, but you need to pay attention to that too. So I am worried that in 30 years, it's not just about, well, these kids are going to be sick because we don't have proper nutrition. They're not going to have the land that they need to even grow the food because we've done such a poor job as being stakeholders. So I also feel sometimes like Oprah. And what I mean by that, I don't have her money yet. But I always like to try to give away something. And so obviously, since I'm a professor, I teach out of the college education. At Ohio State, I teach classes around poverty. I also teach African American male leadership classes, so all black male classes, as a part of retaining black males because they're the least retained in higher education if you follow higher education that way. I also teach women leadership courses, and then this year I'm teaching a health disparity course because that's a really big issue if you're, in our country, is healthcare disparity. And so I wanted to ask a question of who in the room who's not Jewish could give a brief, 2 sentences about who Rabbi Heschel was for this lovely book right here by Claude M. Steele on how stereotypes affect us and what we can do. It's almost like a Honda. It's almost like what else does she give away? Cars, what else? She also give away washing machines. This is almost like, not the Samsung one that explodes though. Yeah. Oh, we do? Okay.
I'm Reverend Jim Ray. We read Abraham Heschel's stuff in seminary. I know him to be a marvelous individual who cared about all kinds of people, and a lot of folk knew about him, were with him on different occasions when they were working for social justice kinds of things. He really put his feet on the ground and followed the writings of the prophets. I often think back to myself. I think I got more out of the prophets in the Old Testament in seminary than I did with a professor talking about Jesus. By now I know Jesus was a street preacher, and he really was there, but I really got the message from the Old Testament about what you're supposed to do for God's people. And Abraham Heschel was one who knew that right down the line, and was a God that I admired, and many other people admired also.
You've earned this book and then some. Thank you so much. I want to give it a little round of sound. That was really good. That was really good. You take this in. So, Rabbi Heschel, for those of you who probably need more of like a picture sort of in your head, was one of King's confidants, was seen walking like arm in arm with him many times during the marches. But what I love a lot about Rabbi Heschel, and it kind of goes to show you that that Sarah and I have a real relationship. So I was in her office, and she was like, "Look at this like new framed picture that I have," and it quotes Rabbi Heschel that praying with my feet. And I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about that in my talk. Look at that synergy, natural energy that we're really friends, and it's not this fake thing, right? So what I love about Rabbi Heschel, taking sort of you to the beginning before ending, is that he really embodied what it meant to be like a foot soldier, right? And so the last point I wanted to make with you is making sure you got to get your hands dirty, right? And so it's interesting that the Reverend talked about the Old Testament being where he got so much out of it. Well, in the Old Testament it talked about taking care of the poor, taking care of the widowed, and taking care of the sick. In America, what do we do the worst about? Taking care of the poor, taking care of the widow, and taking care of the sick. And so, interestingly enough, I don't have my cane with me because I was like, I can hold on to this. So this summer, I'm going to end sort of with this story about myself and understanding healthcare disparities and what we need to do. Call to action. So you may see that I have this like machine on me. So this is an external defibrillator. An external defibrillator is I'm wearing a harness underneath my clothes, and basically if my heart were to stop, it would shock me, right? And so it's just a preventive measure. It's never had to turn on. I'm okay. Don't get worried. You're like, oh my gosh, we gotta call 911. But I'm okay. So what happened to me this summer, and I just share a little bit about this story because as a professor, I'm a teacher, right? I try to be transparent. And my mom died a year ago. My mom died a year ago. She 10 years was in and out of the hospital. And growing up in poverty, we know that the type of stress that it causes on your body lends itself for you to be open to certain sicknesses more than others. And so my mother worked, like I said, she made $25,000 at the max. I was making that as a graduate student, right, and still was poor, right? I was a grad student living with 5 other women, and I'm like, I'm so poor I can't even put gas. I'm like, how did my mom feed all us? And my brother is big as hell, you know what I mean? I think about how did she do all that? And I really mean he was like a 19.5 shoe, and he's really big. So I think about like why is there just this huge healthcare disparity in our country? And again, that we don't take care of the poor, right? And we don't take care of the aged. And so a part of me now going through what I've gone through, and so which in June I actually was put on life support. I almost died, and they're like, you're this medical marvel. We didn't think you wake up and walk out of here. And I was like, well, you don't know me. And so I'm up. And so I have several diagnoses. And so I have a temporary, I walk with this cane, and I have this defibrillator, and I'm in rehab, and I do all these different things. Was only allowed to drive like a month and a half ago. So if you see me on the street, don't be scared. But all these things you sort of lose. And so I think about my mother, and now that I've had to go through the healthcare system, if she didn't have children who were competent and overeducated, how would she have navigated that system with a basic equivalent of an 8th grade degree, right? So, all the things she had to sort of go through, the medications, I was always driving home to help take care of her and make sure she had fresh food and cooking for her, and I talk about I cook so bougie, and like my family, like, you cook so bougie now. I'm like, that's what keeps me alive. And so all these different things, and I think about my mom who worked as a butcher, and it lifted like 50 to 60 pounds of meat, and just her body was just tired, and really ravaged with disease at the end. And I think about there's so many people who are like her, and we have to make sure that when we talk about that we're in the trenches, that we're talking about education, right? We're talking about education, the ecology, and healthcare, and what's going on with people and access to healthcare, because most of the stuff could be prevented. Most of the stuff could be prevented. For me, what's happened was just like a weird sort of flukish thing, but for my mom, it is literally the bonds of poverty that really ravaged her body, and the fact that she did labor jobs her whole life and worked 80 hours a week doing them. And so it killed her body and not her spirit, but in the end, the treatment will kill your spirit. Right? And so I think that those are the kind of things that we need to be really thinking about when we talk about how we're going to be trenches. And I think if Rabbi Heschel was still here, he would be talking about also healthcare disparity. He would be talking about like how are we not taking care of the poor, because that is the same thing that he was talking about in 1963, right? So we have to be very poignant about looking at the past as a means to understanding moving forward. We have to make sure that we're coalition building, but doing that in a very organic way. Not in a way that's, oh, we just have this program and see each other twice a year or during this week, right? Oh, I know this person, but that same synergy was, oh, Sarah and I, right? I'm like, girl, look at you having this. I'm talking about, it's this natural synergy, right? You have to spend real time together, intentionally living life together, which means we have to think about these neighborhoods, right? That if we were most segregated than we've ever been, but we were better together, right? When we were together, we were better. So I think there's something to be said about where you live is important. What we say now is that your zip code can indicate what's going to happen to you. And so one of the things that I do work in is the mass incarceration of young kids. And so I spend a lot of time in prison. I'm there like 2-3 days a week. And what I see are these young people who are suffering from poverty, and they're doing the kind of crimes, if it's a drug crime, well, let me tell you, I advise a fraternity. There's a lot of drugs in that fraternity, let's just be real, right? And a lot of drugs in college life, right? Even our former presidents, plural, you know, say that they've done some recreational drugs, right? So for the same thing that a college student is doing at a football game, I get kids locked up for like 2 years on, right? So that savage inequality, how are we advocating for other people? Why are we still not taking care of the poor? And so we have to be, again, living intentionally together, that synergy on issues like education, environment, mass incarceration. What are we doing for the poor? And what are we doing about healthcare disparity? We have to stay curious about difference. And some of those is taking those small risks. Think about having a Black Jewish Seder and having allies there. So people who are maybe don't identify as Jewish, but getting to have that experience together. Know history, honor it, and make sure you're informed by it. We keep repeating the same mistakes. I see that time and time again with students. They always think that their idea is original. And I'm sure there's something in Ecclesiastes that says there's nothing new under the sun, right? So when they're like, I want to start this new student organization, it's going to do X, Y, Z. I was like, well, 2 years ago, it was the same organization, you know, it failed, you know, and so they're thinking, oh, it's not going to be like mine. Well, it's the same, right? It's a different year, but it's the same, and they hate to hear it, but I tell them. And so, again, knowing making sure that we're making history relevant to folks and studying that, so we're not repeating the same mistakes, but that we're also looking at the best practices that were there. We know, so you got to practice what you preach. So not only do I work in around poverty, etc., but I talk about I live in the hood and I bought my car in the hood, right? So I bought my car locally in a neighborhood that's under privileged, and I live in a neighborhood that right now is actually going through some changes. It's called Wyland Park. And the past couple years has really been changing because we know what works the best is a mixed income neighborhood. So not where you have all the wealthy, not where you have all the poor, but you have everybody together. So I bought a house that's across the street from Section 8 housing. The vice president of Huntington Bank lives down the street from me, right? There's the lady who lives next to me is a farm tech, right? So what needs to happen is little kids, no matter what they look like, can say, they look at me and I look like them, and like that's what a doctor looks like, right? But then there's around the corner a Jewish doctor, MD, who is living there, and we're all living life together, and we're all at the same civic association meetings. Our civic association meeting looks like the Rainbow Coalition from 1970, right? That's living life together organically and doing things intentionally and caring about all children and not pulling kids out, not pulling, you know, richer families out of public schools, because you lose that SES diversity. The social economic status diversity is so important, and we think, wow, this school is so monolithic, right? It's just one kind of kid. That's not a good environment for kids to be learning in. There needs to be lots of diversity, because then that helps. For me, even though I was a poor kid at my school, it was pretty diverse, and so I knew kids from sort of all different cultures. You know, I knew that, you know, kimchi was something that was Korean because there was Korean kids in my school, right? I knew that, you know, Jewish holidays, you know, which Jewish holidays were important because there were Jewish students at my school. And so having that kind of experience also helped shape me, you know, as I keep moving forward, because I had a base. And so we have to make sure this intentionally living life together, you have to also practice what you preach. If you're about this kind of work and really want to do it, and some of you are like, oh, I've lived in the same house for 35 years, but how are you coaching young people? Like, well, you know what, this is a better way to do it than what I've done, right? Buy your house somewhere where you could actually be doing this intentional work together, because where you live is important, and we need to break that horrible thing around zip code and how that dictates how well a kid is going to do in life. So that's the words I wanted to share with you guys. I'm so excited to have been here.